a little bit about medium to large size, and rather small to medium ways of thinking about the interface between research and policy. And I'm thinking, for those of you fans of Brofenbrain, are really thinking about mesosystem, exosystem, organizational policy, in ways you can influence that. Both, I'll talk about some basic research examples, but also some participatory action research examples. Maybe start with a couple of the larger ones. There are a lot of foundations, all that big corporate profit that gets dumped into foundations. There are a lot of money in foundations. And my interest is in youth political development. And as the presenters this morning were saying, you always need to think about some way that you can package your ideas without losing your passion and what you're really interested in, but still be able to further your access to resources. And for me, youth political development, I sort of package right now in this whole issue around civic, because civic is a great term. You can do all kinds of things and be a good citizen. Remember, give me liberty or give me death. I mean, that's pretty radical stuff. So I think about areas of this area of youth civic engagement. And to give you an example, Pew Charitable Trust in 2003 gave out over $38 million to youth serving institutions in an effort to bolster youth civic engagement. I think it's important for us to make sure, and that was actually the name of a paper I did with Connie Flanagan, to really push the envelope on what civic is, so that youth organizing, social justice activism is considered part of what civic includes. And it's not difficult to do once you sort of think about that strategically, about, okay, when you put out an RFP and you talk about civic engagement and giving out grants for civic engagement and $38 million around the country, make sure there's a bullet point that includes social justice activism as well as other kinds of civic and community service work. So that's a policy. That's a policy that foundations set. And the question is, how do we make sure policies get some of these things on the radar screen that we value along with the things that they value? Or probably, to state it more strategically, how do we realize that what our agenda is actually part of their agenda, they just don't know it yet? I'll give you a concrete example of that. I was asked by Spencer Foundation, along with a lot of folks doing civic development, to help them to develop an initiative. They were moving to the civic education area because Spencer Foundation does research on education. And heretofore, they had not included civic engagement in part of their portfolio. And so they asked me to, because I was interested, and I titled some of my publications Civic, to bring in and to talk about that. And so what we were able to do over a series of 2 or 3 meetings we had in Chicago was, for the couple of us who were interested in social justice activism, to have those words actually part of the call of proposal that they would ultimately announce. So that means this money then would be made available to people who are doing work around political and organizing issues. So when you think policy, I mean, one thing, the reason why we talked about this sort of higher level policy this morning is because a lot of money is in government. Huge, huge amounts, much more than $38 million. And that's all well and good, but there are a lot of other people, and I'll talk about those as I go along, who also control a lot of resources. And thus, if you can shape their agenda to cover our social justice agenda, then you're going to disseminate these ideas, open up opportunities for young people and others to do and follow a social justice agenda. And so ultimately, so there are 2 sort of happy endings to the Spencer Foundation project. One is this terminology got included and emerged as part of the definition of civic. And foundations are really a big club, and they talk to each other. They have meetings where they get together and they talk about what they're doing. And so if one person starts including social justice activism as part of civic development, then the other foundation might say, well, we hadn't thought about that. Where'd you get some of those ideas? So they share a few papers, and next thing you know, then the next call that gets out will include this agenda as well. So foundations, I think, are a really important area for this. So that's the good news 1. The good news 2 for me is that I said, well, maybe I can kind of get in a proposal before they kind of get it out on the website. So I said, well, would you entertain like a small grant from me to do some furthering work on this? And so they actually awarded me a small grant before the official announcement to do some work in looking at graduates of the Center for Third World Organizing. I don't know if how many of you are familiar with that. It's one of the oldest organizations that trains organizers of color in the U.S. They're based in Oakland, California. And what I'm doing for them is to try to, as C2, I've had a relationship with them a number of years, has given me access to the applications for their community organizing program. You can look up c2ctwo.org, and they have what they call a movement activist program, MAP. And they place folks and train them to do community organizing. And people have to apply for this. And so I got the last about 25 years of applications for people who applied to their training program and were accepted. And what we've been doing is a content analysis of those applications, trying to understand some of the settings and experiences they had when they were young that shaped their commitment to social justice activism. And then what I'm going to do then with this is try to think about, if we're talking about the policy around service learning in schools, if we're talking about education in the classroom, after school, out of school, what kind of settings do we need to create? What kind of relationships between adults and youth do we need to think about in order to foster an interest in the commitment to social justice organizing? So the next step would be for Spencer to have this set of documents and research that shows a connection between social justice activism and the advancement of education in schools and also in non-school settings. So that's one of the, again, the examples of something, a step down from the government, yet an important one. Another important area on sort of the bigger side, I think, is this whole issue of service learning for young people. And so what we want to think about is the beauty of service learning, although they call it service, the fact of the matter is they don't do much in many schools about creating projects for them. It's very easy for you to just go in there and say, oh, I got something for young people to do so they can fulfill this requirement. And most of the time, they don't even ask very many questions. They're just glad someone wants something to do. So if you're coming from a school, you could create a practicum experience or a part of some course that you're taking and actually design something to give young people an experience in social justice work rather than cleaning up empty lots at the last minute in their communities, which many do. So since I have 5 minutes, I said I'd talk a little bit about PAR, and I will mention that. One of the things that United Way funded for us through my partner in crime is we were interested in what young people thought, and this is sort of connected with what I mentioned before, what young people saw as the major issues that youth faced in Atlanta. Nobody really asked them that in a way, in creating a forum, a venue for young people to come to that would be youth design and youth run to allow those issues and concerns that young people have to percolate upward. So it's a long story how we got to it. We formed this organization called the Youth Adult Alliance, and a group of young people over about 6 months, again funded by the United Way, they designed a retreat day for young people. And we had probably about 15, 20 organizations, youth organizations all together, and 40 or so youth representing those organizations came together. And what the young people designed is a combination of workshops to inform their peers, but then a couple sessions that were more assessment, including some surveys to find out what their concerns were. So part education, so sort of like a give and take. You tell us what you think, we give you some information that you need to know that we think are important issues for youth. And the major product out of that was a list of the major priorities they saw as young people, as representatives of their organizations, that they thought were central issues for young people in Atlanta. We'll talk about that now, we can discuss it perhaps later, but then the second phase is having identified this set of priorities is to pick some on the top list to develop some kind of campaign, youth adult partnership around a campaign that would actually act on these issues around some organization. Could have been United Way, as I mentioned before, and what we were thinking about with them, could have been City Council, but some way to move those forward in a data-based fashion based on the words in the interests of young people. So with that, I'll close, and we can come back to that if we have time after questions.